from Red Cross that the people in Basra may be facing a humanitarian disaster in that they have no water and they have no electricity. And I think a city that size cannot afford to go without electricity or water for long. Apart from the water aspect, you can imagine what it does to sanitation. And so I think urgent measures should be taken to restore electricity and water to that population.
And you heard Secretary Annan talk about a city that size. Once again, 1.7 million people, getting word that for perhaps the last 2 to 3 days there has been no power or clean water in that city. Right now we want to bring in Cassandra Nelson. She is with Mercy Corps. That is a non-governmental organization that is here in the Persian Gulf trying to help the people of Iraq. And she's joining us not too far from where we're standing here in Kuwait City. Cassandra, thanks for being with us.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Please, can you tell us of the people, the volunteers? Do you already have volunteers in Iraq right now?
Well, we have staff here in place, 5 permanent Mercy Corps staff members. We also have 14 staff members located throughout the region in Iran, Jordan, and northern Iraq. We also do have some volunteers we're working with here locally to put in place a lot of our preparations for delivering humanitarian aid.
And I imagine you're facing some of the same frustrations as we're seeing here at the Red Crescent here in Kuwait City about just actually physically getting those supplies into Iraq.
We're really facing 2 major obstacles and frustrating points. First of all, certainly is security and access into Iraq. Today at the Humanitarian Operations Center briefing, Iraq and even the northern Kuwait border areas were declared a no-go zone, which it has been since the conflict began. Also, the UN Security Coordinator has been unable to continue or unable to carry out actually security assessments in Iraq because the situation is so unstable currently. So at this point, clearly, it's not safe for us to move our staff into the region, and we think it's probably going to be some time before the situation stabilizes. But further complicating the matter for us in terms of delivering aid is that we're still awaiting funding. We've had proposals out to major donor agencies for an extended period of time now and have not yet received the funding to carry out some of these significant humanitarian aid, emergency aid programs that we need to do.
What kind of reports are you getting from inside Iraq about just how desperate the situation is for the people there?
Well, we've been getting conflicting information, and they're all unconfirmed reports. Again, that's one of the major frustrations, is that we're simply hearing things third-hand, second-hand, things through the news. We don't have a team in place in southern Iraq that can actually assess the situation properly. But we have heard unconfirmed reports of a state of lawlessness, anywhere from across the Kuwaiti border all the way up to Basra. We've heard stories about looting.
Okay. We are breaking into this because there's a press conference going on in Baghdad. Let's take it live.
I would like to
بقرار مجلس وزراء الخارجية العرب وكما قيل عنه أنه يمثل
and what was said that it represents the minimum of the Arab stand.
أحب أن أؤكد
I would like to emphasize
نعم إنه يمثل الحد الأدنى المطلوب.
It does represent the minimum position, official position of these Arab countries. If the attack did not happen.
ضمن مرحلة التهديد والتهويش بالعدوان.
During the time when they were threatening to attack, this position maybe could be accepted. But now we have war, and we know the intentions of the American and the British in their intentions of occupation and destroying the country and the government. It's very clear
فهذا البيان لا يمثل الحد الأدنى.
This declaration does not represent
ماذا يعني
the
شد
minimum.
العدوان؟ والعدوان قد وقع.
The aggression is going on. It happened.
البشر في المريخ إذا كان هناك بشر في المريخ
People in Mars,
العدوان. وليس مجلس وزراء الأمة العربية اللي يقع عليه العدوان بشكل مباشر.
the Council of Prime
رفض العدوان
to reject this attack,
وأنه طريق غير مقبول ومرفوض قانونيا.
to say that it is not acceptable
هذا
by international law. We say that
لا يكون العدوان قد وقع.
we could say that when the attack did not take place, but now that it is taking place, this logic
لا قيمة له.
has no value.
سيقولون إذا ما هو الموقف؟ عندما يقع العدوان قدرات الأمة كبيرة.
The ability of our nation is great,
وإذا كان هناك
and if there is
موقف
a stand
وعدم الوقوع تحت هيمنة الإدارة الأمريكية،
where it is not under the influence of the American administration,
إذا قالوا بأن اتفاقية الدفاع المشترك
if they say that our mutual defense agreement
ميتة،
is dead,
فهناك كثير من الإمكانات
there are plenty of
يمكن كان أن تخرج من هذا المؤتمر
possibilities that this conference could have
العدوان قد وقع.
done. The attack has taken place.
لماذا يزودون العرب العدوانيين بالنفط لتشغيل عجلتهم العدوانية؟ لماذا لا يقرروا وقف ضخ النفط لدول العدوان؟
Why do they ask for halting the aggression by not providing them with oil?
لماذا لا يغلقوا أجواهم وممراتهم المائية والبرية أمام أي نشاط لدول العدوان؟ أليس هذا من حقهم؟ وقد اتخذته دول عديدة أخرى غير عربية.
Bearing in mind that some non-Arab countries have taken such a stance.
لماذا لا يطلبوا بغلق السفارات الأمريكية والبريطانية بدل أن يقتلوا شعبهم عندما يتوجه في المظاهرات إلى هذه السفارات؟
For the closure of U.S. embassies in their countries instead of telling their people.
يدافعون عن أمن وسلامة منتسبي سفارات دول العدوان، ولكنهم
They care for the security.
لا يعيرون أهمية أو يقدموا أي شيء لحماية وأمن أبناء شعب العراق.
Never provide an army or anything that could save the security and safety.
لا يقطعوا العلاقات لأنهم غير قادرين كما نلاحظ،
They do not cut off relations because they are not capable to do so.
لكن ليقولوا لهم
But they only want to tell them.
ليغادر كل منتسبي سفاراتكم لأننا لا نستطيع.
Let them tell them that to leave all the embassies
لأنهم لا يستطيعون أن
because
أو يتحملوا مسؤولية
they
أمنهم.
cannot protect them and bear responsibility for their safety.
ولكن حتى هذا
Even that
لم يحدث،
did not happen.
واللي حدث هو العكس.
What happened is the contrary.
الإدارة الأمريكية طلبت من 60 دولة
The American administration asked for over 60 countries all over the world
تتواجد فيها السفارات العراقية
where Iraqi embassies are represented,
أن يغلقوا السفارات العراقية أو
asked
يخرجوا
them
بعض
to
منتسبيها.
close these embassies or expel some of a number of their diplomats.
عدد كبير أو الأغلبية من الدول رفضت
A
هذا
great
الطلب.
number of these countries refuse to this
لأن
request
هذا يقع جزء من السيادة
because this is a matter of sovereignty.
ولم يلبي هذا الطلب إلا جزء قليل من الدول أو عدد قليل
Very
من الدول.
few countries complied with this request.
منهم دول عربية
Some were Arab countries, including Jordan,
يستدعى السفير العراقي
where the Iraqi ambassador was recalled
فورا
and was
بدون حتى
expelled
مضي ساعات
immediately,
وبدون
not
ذكر
even
السبب.
to wait few hours and without even mentioning a reason.
هذا هو اللي يجري.
This is what is going on.
فكيف نقول أن هذا
How
القرار
could we say that this decision
في العرب بأنه
of
يتحد أدنى؟
Arab foreign ministers mean anything?
وأعود مرة أخرى لماذا لا
And I
يفعل
say another time,
من أجل ماذا أعد هذا المجلس
why did this council meet?
إيقاف ضخ النفط لأمريكا وبريطانيا.
To
ألا
stop
تعتقدون بأنه سيكسر ظهر العدوان؟
stopping pumping the oil to the America and Britannia would break their backs.
أما هذا النفط مالكه الحقيقي هم الأمريكان
The real owner of this oil are the Americans
وليس بلدان الإنتاج نفسها.
and not the countries that are producing it.
فمن يقول بأن لا يوجد لدى العرب إمكانية
Who says that Arabs have no resources?
فهذا غير صحيح.
That is not true.
ونقول
And I say,
لهم
and I tell them,
لأشقائنا
to our brothers,
لأحبائنا
to our friends,
أن الشعب العراقي صامد
that the Iraqi people will
وأعطاهم
resist,
فرصة.
and they gave them a chance.
يمكن لو انهار العراق لا سمح الله في اليوم الأول أو الثاني
Even if Iraq collapsed in the first or second day, some of them would have said,
يقول كنا
they would
مقررين
They
أن
would
نقوم
say,
بدعم العراق
we
ولكن
were intending to support Iraq, but they collapsed quickly and immediately.
لعوائلهم
And they would, what did it say to their people?
ماذا سيسجل لهم التاريخ؟
What going history to record for their deed express about rejecting this attack? I tell our people, the Iraqis, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, we will resist
قدم الأمريكان
and we will defeat the Americans
والبريطانيين ومن يواليهم
and the British and whoever support them.
ولكن نحن نريد لهم
But
ولو حد أدنى من الموقف المشرف
we just
قبل أن
ask
تنتهي هذه المعركة
a minimum
بحول الله.
of an honorable stand before this battle ends,
المعركة وهم على هذا
when this war,
الموقف المتردد.
that they would deal with this position and stand.
هذا الموقف ليس ينسجم مع موقف شعبهم.
This does not agree with the will of their people.
شعبهم يريد قطع العلاقات مع الكيان الصهيوني وقد
The
قالها.
people want them to stop the relation with the Zionist
كما يظهر
regime.
اتفاقيات كام ديفيد
But
ووادي
according
عرب أقدس من اتفاقية
to
الدفاع المشترك.
Camp David, Wadi Araba is more holy than their agreement of mutual defense.
الشعوب طلبت مقاطعة دول العدوان.
The people wanted
وليس
to
العدوان.
stop relationship with the
الشعب
aggressors.
العربي يطالب بقطع العلاقات
Arab
الاقتصادية
people and Arab nations
بمقاطعة البضائع
want an economic boycott
المضايق والممرات
to stop passages,
الآن المضايق والممرات والأراضي
and they want to stop passages and canals. The canals are still open for the aggressors,
ولكنها مغلقة أمام البضائع والأموية
but
اللي تصل
it is
إلى العراق
closed for the food and medicine for Iraqi people.
كما سمعتم قبل قليل
As you
عندما
heard
تحدث لكم
few
وزير التجارة بأن البضائع
minutes
الآن
ago
موجودة في الرويشد
that
ويمنع
many of these
دخولها.
supplies are in Ruwaishid and they were stopped from entry to Iraq.
أنا أقول
I tell you,
وأتمنى مرة أخرى
and I hope
بسرعة أن يجتمع العرب على أي مستوى
that the Arabs would meet
ويتخذوا قرار لائق
and take a decision that is
ولو
proper,
بالحد الأدنى
that does not represent the minimum, but would match
على العراق
this attack on
وعلى
Iraq
الأمة العربية
and on the Arab nation,
وخاصة أن
especially
القرار لمجلس وزراء الخارجية
that
بأن هذه
free
الشعب الأردني الشقيق
as a friendship
تثمينا
sign from the president of the Iraq.
To the people of Jordan,
2 days ago,
قبل يومين سمعت
I heard that when the Prime Minister of Jordan was asked about oil issues,
موضوع النفط
he claimed
قال أن
that
النفط توقف
pumping oil
منذ يوم الأول من العدوان
stopped
طبعا هو لم يقل
at
عدوان
the first day of the attack, or he said war. He did not mention who
ولم يقل
stopped
من
it.
أوقفه
I tell the Jordanian people that
أوقف نقل النفط
the oil was stopped by the Jordanian government.
الحكومة الأردنية
On the second day of the attack,
اليوم الثاني من العدوان واتصل
Iraqi officials contacted Jordanian officials and asked them why
وسألوهم لماذا
the
لم
trucks
تصل
did
السيارات
not
أو
reach
شحنات
Iraq to
الصواريخ لنقل
transport oil. They said that the security situation prevents them from sending these trucks and the drivers could not go to Iraq.
يتمكنون أن يأتوا إلى العراق فأنا
So
أقول
I say,
إذا لم
if
تتحول الجبهة
the
الأردنية
Jordanian front is not supporting the Americans, why are they stopping the transport of goods between these two countries? I say this,
أنا أقول هذا
and stopping
مكرمة القائد
the agreement and this protocol was done unilaterally by the Jordanian government. I know
أنا أعرف البعض من
some of the fifth column there
والمخابرات
who
الأردنية
and the Jordanian intelligence who are misleading the people of Jordan and telling them that Iraq stopped the oil shipments. We do not know what they're going to say later
يقولون فيما بعد
when they're going to discuss the matter of oil and their need for oil.
All right, we're going to step away from this right now.
The
You've been
other
listening to the
side
Iraqi
of
Vice
matter.
President Taha Yassin Ramadan.
That's right, speaking from Baghdad. It is 5 a.m. here on the East Coast. Let's take a look at the latest developments at this hour.
We do have this just into CNN, and I want to read you this from The Wire. This is from Reuters. We understand now that the southern Iraqi port town of Qasr, where U.S. and British forces have faced Iraqi resistance for days, is now safe and open. That's according to a British commander. Brigadier Jim Dutton, commander of the British Royal Marines 3rd Commando Brigade, told reporters that he hoped the first ship bringing humanitarian aid into Iraq would arrive within the next 48 hours. Again, Qasr, which is in the southeastern part of Iraq and is a major port there, one of the major ports of Iraq. Humanitarian aid should be coming in there, and coalition forces have now taken control of that. But just to the north in Basra, that's certainly not the case. Basra, as a matter of fact, is now considered a legitimate military target. That is the word from British military officials who have determined that Iraqi forces are regrouping in the city. It's not immediately clear how coalition forces will attempt to wear down Iraqi military forces inside Basra. And we have confirmation a British soldier was killed on Monday in an operation near Basra. It happened while British troops were trying to capture 2 men believed to be senior members of the Ba'ath Party, which is, of course, Saddam Hussein's power base. At least one of those men was captured. And Kuwaitis have begun sending humanitarian aid to Iraq, even though a senior Iraqi official says the country doesn't need it. The plan is to provide about 45,000 meals a day to be delivered to Iraqis as soon as it is feasible and safe. And as I just said, the port of Qasr now is under coalition control, and that means humanitarian aid should be coming into that port within 48 hours. Back to the battle zone now. U.S. Marines face a new fight in Nasiriyah. CNN's Art Harris is CNN's Art Harris is embedded with the U.S. Marines in that area. He says as the Marines drove through the city, there was gunfire all around them, and the Iraqis have destroyed several U.S. vehicles. We also understand a terrible sandstorm is happening right there now, along with rain. Nasty conditions in Nasiriyah this morning. Also, the U.S. Navy is planning on enlisting trained dolphins to locate mines in the waters around Qasr. Mine-sweeping operations by U.S. and Australian forces have been underway in that port city since the beginning of the war. Coalition forces plan to use Qasr as a port for humanitarian aid.
A lot has been happening. Coming up in the next hour on CNN's coverage in the war in Iraq, U.S. intelligence suggests Iraqi forces may, and we say may, use chemical weapons on U.S. troops if they get near Baghdad. CNN's Chris Plant shares what he's heard on that possibility straight ahead in a live report from the Pentagon. Also, get the results of a CNN poll. We ask Americans how many casualties they expect in this war. The feedback is interesting to say the least. We'll have that coming up. We'll also be taking you to the front lines for live reports from our embedded reporters. Nobody has more people deployed in the field. Our coverage of the war in Iraq continues right now.
All right, listen up.
And you're looking at a live picture out of Baghdad, where Operation Iraqi Freedom enters its 6th day. A peaceful shot here, but we understand bombs are being dropped on Baghdad throughout the morning. The target, supposedly, Saddam Hussein International Airport.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is 1 p.m. in Baghdad, as you see there, 5 a.m. here on the East Coast of the United States, Tuesday, March 25th from CNN's global headquarters in Atlanta. I'm Anderson Cooper.
And I'm Carol Costello. Thanks so much for joining this morning. Time now for an early briefing on the stories that will be news later today. President Bush unveils his new war budget request this morning at the Pentagon. Officials say it'll be about $75 billion, and he wants congressional approval by April 11th. Also at the Pentagon, the daily war briefing will be held at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. CNN will bring that to you live, as always. And this month's Consumer Confidence Report comes out today. We'll see what effect, if any, the war is having on consumers. We know what effect it's having on the stock market right now.
That's right. We're going to look right now at where coalition forces are operating right now in Iraq. The U.S. Army's 101st Airborne is moving toward Baghdad from the southwest. Let's take a look at this graphic right here. They're moving toward Baghdad from the southwest, 101st Airborne right there. It's on the left of the 3rd Army's lead element, the 7th Cavalry, and the 1st Marines battling Iraqi forces in Nasiriyah. Now, U.S. forces have an airfield in western Iraq. That's H3 in the graphic on the left-hand side of your screen. It also appears more special forces are pouring into the north. This is relatively new development. U.S. General Tommy Franks says American, British, and Australian special forces are operating in the north as well as across Iraq. That's a quick look at what's happening across Iraq right now.
And also, a little more than an hour ago, an Iraqi government official talked about the humanitarian aid the U.S. and Britain say they want to bring into Iraq at Qasr. Basically, that Iraqi official says his country doesn't need the aid.
The evil administration, represented by Bush and Blair, are haunting the people of Iraq, not just by bombs that they are dropping every day on the citizens and invading their holy lands, which they were going to be buried in. But now they are preventing food and medicine from the people of Iraq.
And he's talking about the UN's Oil for Food program, which he thinks should be started up again. Let's go live to Jordan now to check in with Reem Brahimi. Reem, you're pretty much of an expert on all things Iraq. You've certainly been stationed in Baghdad for a long time, and you're out of there right now. What do you make of that press conference and the one that happened after it?
Well, a couple of points, Carol. Definitely the trade minister keen to send the message that Iraq has prepared also for the eventuality of disruption of food. Now, that was one of the main fears, not only of humanitarian aid workers, but of course this would have consequences on the Iraqi government. The main concern of the Iraqi government has been with regard to the civilian population, to make sure that they don't need to go out for anything, that they don't need to demand food, that they can stay at home and have what they need. That would also probably prevent risks of social unrest in their view. Now, the trade minister made the point that despite the disruption of the Oil for Food program, despite the disruption of the food distribution throughout Iraq by the United Nations and other international humanitarian aid groups, well, the Iraqi government has provided for Iraqi people. The Iraqi government has made sure that 6 months worth of food stocks have been distributed to various cities in order to make sure Iraqi people do not need extra help from anyone else outside of the Iraqi government.
And Reem,
let's go to the yeah.
I was just going to clarify
Carol.
the Oil for Food program. Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, suspended that at the start of these hostilities. That Iraqi trade minister wants Kofi Annan to start it up again, but that's unlikely to happen, isn't it?
Well, it would be very difficult, Carol, indeed. When the humanitarian aid workers that are in charge of the Oil for Food program in Iraq pulled out, the Iraqi foreign minister was furious, wrote a letter to the UN Secretary General complaining about that, saying that it contradicted the United Nations responsibilities to help the Iraqi people. As you know, the Oil for Food program was set up to help the Iraqi people compensate for the sanctions imposed by the United Nations, and it has helped them survive the sanctions in the past years, since '96, when the Oil for Food program came into effect.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Of course, they would like it to start again, but...
Right. The other point that I want to make clear is that we recently got word from Reuters that the port city of Qasr is now under coalition control, and they say that humanitarian aid will be brought in the next 48 hours. The Iraqi trade minister says Iraq doesn't want that humanitarian aid.
That was exactly my next point, Carol. You see, Qasr is very strategic because that is where all the Oil for Food, the food that was coming in under that program was coming in and then being distributed from there to the rest of Iraq. Now, of course, the fact that now that is not under Iraqi control directly anymore, that it's still in question, and that now the coalition forces want to be the ones distributing humanitarian aid, of course, that poses a great problem of sovereignty for the Iraqi government, which would be why the trade minister has rejected that offer. And then, of course, there's what the Vice President, Taha Yassin Ramadan, has said about the trade between Jordan and Iraq. He is accusing Jordan of having stopped that trade, and of course Iraq had been supplied recently. Iraq was supplying Jordan with oil, and in exchange for that it was receiving a lot of goods for Jordan. Now that stopped because Jordan thinks that the road between Baghdad and Amman basically is not safe anymore, and that's why the Vice President came out to denounce the halt of that trade. Carol?
Understand. Reem Brahimi, thanks for your insight, reporting live from Jordan this morning.
All right, we're going to check in with our old friend Bill Hemmer, who is live in Kuwait City, as he has been since the beginning of this conflict. Bill, what's the latest?
Anderson, hello. Carol, hello as well. Welcome to Tuesday here in Kuwait. Already getting indications from the British military that there is some sort of shift in strategy in southeastern Iraq. Christiane Amanpour broke this story first about 2 hours ago. She is still in Kuwait with the British military. We pick things up now with Christiane to find out what's happening and what she's being told. Hello.
Bill, indeed, the British have had to change tactics because of the stiffer than expected resistance from the Iraqis, and most particularly because the Iraqis have pulled back into Basra, Iraq's second biggest town in the south. And what's happened is they had expected, the British had briefed us several days ago, that elements of the 51st Iraqi Army Division had surrendered and melted away. Well, it turns out that, in fact, these troops have moved back into the civilian population of Basra. They've gone with their all their heavy equipment, their tanks, artillery, and their infantry, and from there they are challenging British forces. Now, that means that British have now called Basra a military target in order to wear down those Iraqi troops, they hope, and then to open up the way for the delivery of humanitarian aid. This is a shift because originally, the British had said they were going to bypass Basra, in a sense, and not take it on militarily, and just hope that they would be welcomed, that any kind of military resistance would melt away, surrender, come on side, so to speak. This has not happened. Now, of course, this means that it is a potential problem for UK forces, because it's not only difficult and high risk to fight in urban areas, but it means that Iraq has now taken the advantage when it comes to Basra. In other words, they're bringing in the British to fight on the Iraqi terms. And Iraq has always wanted to bring them into street fighting, estimating that, A, they could cause significant casualties on the US or indeed UK forces, or they would force the UK or US forces to cause significant civilian casualties, which they don't want to do. This is what the British Colonel Chris Vernon, who's the military spokesman, told us about how they were now going to have to engage the Iraqi forces in Basra.
We're on the outskirts of Basra. We're seizing fleeting opportunities as he brings his tanks out to the rear outskirts, engaging with direct fire tanks and indeed artillery, but only onto the outskirts where we're pretty clear we're not going to inflict collateral damage on civilians.
They have had other engagements in Basra.
Coalition aircraft continue to strike Iraqi positions in various parts of northern Iraq. CNN's Kevin Seitz, who is with the Kurd fighters in the town of Shamshamal, witnessed the bombing this morning of Iraqi command bunkers on a ridge overlooking the town. We understand at least 6 airstrikes have taken place there. A second U.S. soldier has reportedly died from wounds suffered during a grenade attack blamed on a fellow soldier. That, according to Reuters and the Associated Press. 13 other 101st Airborne soldiers were injured. The soldier accused in the attack is awaiting formal charges. And right now, the 7th Cavalry, the lead element of the 3rd Army, has temporarily halted its advance on Baghdad. CNN's Walter Rogers, of course, is with the 7th, and he told us earlier this morning Iraqi forces knocked out 2 Abrams tanks on Tuesday, but with no U.S. casualties. Pentagon officials do estimate, though, up to 200 Iraqi soldiers were killed Tuesday near Najaf. British military officials say Iraqi civilians in Basra appear to be staging an uprising. British officials say the revolt began yesterday against the ruling Ba'ath Party. They add that Iraqi paramilitary forces have been targeting civilians with mortars. And coming up in this hour of our coverage of the war in Iraq, we'll have more details on the U.S. coalition airstrikes aimed at the offices of Iraqi television. Also, we'll check in with CNN's Tom Mintier at U.S. Central Command in Doha, Qatar. He'll have more on the reported uprising by the Iraqi citizens in Basra. Plus, we will update you on the efforts to get humanitarian aid to the people of Iraq. Our coverage of the war in Iraq continues right now.
And you are looking at a live shot in Baghdad. It is 2 past 12 o'clock in the afternoon. A hazy picture. Hard to tell exactly what's going on. There has been some bombing overnight. Iraqi TV hit, as Carol just mentioned. I want to give you a visual sense of where coalition forces are right now in the war zone. Let's take a look. We have a graphic, an animated map to help us do that. U.S. and British forces have been making their way farther north in Iraq. In the last 24 hours, there has been a lot of fighting in Najaf, Karbala, Nasiriyah, Nasiriyah and Basra. And in the last couple of hours, there have been coalition airstrikes in northern Iraq near Kirkuk. A lot going on in this hour. We'll keep you updated.
Certainly, as we want to join Ryan Chilcote now. We haven't heard from him lately. He's with the 101st. Ryan, good morning. What's happening with you?
Good morning. Well, I am in southern Iraq with the 101st Airborne's 3rd Brigade, and I can tell you we are now in our 2nd day of an absolutely vicious sandstorm. This is really it's difficult to describe in words. You can't see farther than maybe 10, 15 feet in front of you. In fact, just last night, a soldier that was going to the latrines maybe 10, 15 feet away from his tent got lost for 8 hours. That's the kind of sandstorm we're faced with right now. And what that means is the 101st Airborne's entire helicopter fleet has been grounded, and they have been grounded since yesterday morning. In fact, not only are those helicopters not flying from the base right now, but a lot of the helicopters over the last 2 days that were actually already out on missions, they had to set down wherever they were, whether that was in a friendly or not so friendly place, and start pulling security around their helicopter. So really serious situation. Basically the entire offensive power of the 101st Airborne, because it is a division that specializes in air assault, i.e. moving its troops by helicopters, behind Iraqi lines, and also destroying Iraqi targets, using its attack helicopters. That its entire offensive capability has been paralyzed by this sandstorm.
Ryan?
And quite frankly, I think that... Oh, go ahead.
Ryan, I was just curious. You said that one of the soldiers went to the latrine and got lost 8 hours because of this sandstorm. That must be a frightening thing, because if you don't know where you are, you don't know what could happen.
Absolutely. I'm at a brand new forward operating base. It's really quite a massive base that the 101st Airborne has set up in southern Iraq. I can't tell you any more specifically than southern Iraq. I can't tell you more specifically where it is than just simply by saying southern Iraq. But it is a very important strategic location, and it is brand new. It's literally, I think today is day 4 of its existence. And it is already being probed by Iraqi militia. And when I say militia, this is I think for all of us, a new word, but by small groups of Iraqi soldiers, and by small I mean 3 to 10 soldiers in each group. And they are conducting surveillance, trying to get into monitoring convoys that go by and preparing attacks, according to the commanders here at the 3rd Infantry Regiment that I'm with.
Understand.
With I
wanted to ask you too, Ryan, about the grenade attack at Kuwait. A second person has died there. Are people aware of that where you are?
Yeah, they became aware pretty quickly, actually. That was, I guess, 2 nights ago, and I was already with the 3rd Infantry Brigade, the 101st Airborne's 3rd Infantry Brigade, en route into Iraq, and they were notified via radio. And initially, the reaction was grief, because everyone assumed that it had been an Iraqi attack on one of the bases. And all these guys, I'm traveling with the headquarters element of the 3rd Infantry Brigade, and if you'll recall, it was the 1st Infantry Brigade's headquarters element that was hit. So mainly officers, and a lot of those guys are friends. And, they were really shook up. And, but, they put on a brave face and they kept moving. When the reports came across that it may be the work of another soldier, I mean, that threw everyone for a loop. And I think the reaction turned from grief to shock. Because as the commander that of the 3rd Infantry Brigade that I'm traveling with put it, he said, we came here to expect casualties at the hands of the Iraqis, not at the hands of one of our own soldiers.
Do you have word about this suspect at all from where you are?
Yeah, I think what's most interesting is really that the lack of compassion, complete lack of compassion for or sympathy for this suspect. I was talking to a soldier yesterday who said, I think he should get the death penalty, and I bet you he will be the first soldier in a long while to get the death penalty. I don't know the case of whether he has even been charged.
He has
in
now.
fact, we don't know. He has been charged. Well, the soldiers here that I'm traveling with, a lot of them say, for him to do that, there's no excuse, whether it's religious conviction or mental instability. They say to them it doesn't matter. They want to see him get the death penalty because a soldier, they say, should never be able to take up arms against another soldier.
Supposedly he planned this whole thing. His stepfather came out and said it was partly the stress of war. Do they buy that argument at all?
No, they don't. Absolutely not. These soldiers are they're vetted before they come over here. There are psychologists within the unit. There is a lot of assistance, and no, they don't buy that for a minute. They stress. Well, everybody faces that, the stress of war, and the fact of the matter is that attack took place in Kuwait, in the rear, far away from any fighting, and there's just in the minds of the soldiers that I'm traveling with, no excuse for killing your fellow soldiers.
Understand. Ryan Chilcote reporting live with the 101st Airborne Division.
All right, well, all morning long we have been checking in with Kevin Seitz, who is in northern Iraq in Chamchala. There have been some airstrikes there in the last couple of hours. Kevin, bring us up to date. What are you seeing?
Anderson, 6 airstrikes against this Iraqi position just over my shoulder. As we've mentioned earlier, this is a lightly defended Iraqi position. However, it is the first Iraqi position on that road to Kirkuk. There have been 6 strikes. There has not been a strike in the last hour since we talked to you. However, early this morning, about 5:40, we were downstairs just finishing up after a live shot when we were awakened by a huge thunderous explosion, the loudest explosion that we've seen from this location yet. The whole sky turned orange. Car alarms went on. It was still dark out, so we couldn't see exactly where the bomb had hit. 20 minutes later, the same thing happened again. When dawn finally broke, we got up on the rooftop and were able to see that the command bunker that we had been watching for the last 5 days had been obliterated. Basically, this earth and stone structure just no longer exists. There was debris going down the green hillside, black and scorched earth. Now, we thought that might be the end of it, but it hasn't. There were 4 more attacks following that, almost every 20 minutes or so, and it seems that coalition forces has decided that this ridge line, this Iraqi defended ridge line, has to be rolled back. It has to be taken care of before there's any type of coalition advance on the road to Kirkuk. As I said, there hasn't been anything happening in the last hour. However, we were looking through binoculars. It seems there still are Iraqi troops up there, and now they're digging south of the ridgeline. The coalition forces have been hitting basically directly in front of us and a little to the north of us, but now Iraqi troops have moved south down that ridgeline, probably trying to avoid another bombing run. Now, the weather's turned bad here. It hasn't been really good all morning, so I'm sure it's obscuring visibility. But the coalition forces have been fairly precise with the bombing run so far, hitting, as I said, a direct hit on the command bunker and also a couple more on the ridge line. I assume there may be some more today because there is one bunker still standing. I'm going to step aside and let our photographer Bill Skinner push in a little bit. There's one sole command bunker that is still up on that hilltop. It has been untouched. I'm sure the coalition knows that it's there. Perhaps they're just taking a bit of a break and rearming, and may come back for that in the not-so-distant future. Anderson?
All right, Kevin, we'll check in with you, see if they do target that in the next couple of hours. Kevin Seitz in Chamchala, northern Iraq. Carol?
Well, as we've been telling you for the past several hours, a U.S. Tomahawk missile hit the Iraqi television station in Baghdad. We thought it destroyed it earlier, but apparently it's back online and running. Want to head to Amman, Jordan right now and check in with Rula Amin to find out more about this. It's really no surprise that coalition forces would target this TV station, is it?
No, it's not a surprise. In fact, it's an attack that people here in Amman and in Baghdad thought that it would happen almost on the first night of the war. The Iraqi leader and the Iraqi government, since the war started, have been using this TV, Iraqi TV, very heavily in order to send their message. Saddam Hussein himself was on Iraqi television twice since the war started. Last night, the Iraqi Information Minister Saeed al-Sahaf was on television reading a letter, a message from the President Saddam Hussein to his fighters. And the Iraqis have been also using the TV in order to show pictures of what's happening in terms of their fighting and in terms of their resistance. They showed the pictures of the U.S. prisoners. They showed pictures of U.S. downed planes, the Apache helicopters that were down. They speak also, they put on that airwave many Iraqis who say they are willing to fight and dedicate their loyalty to Saddam Hussein. It's also interesting that the Iraqis were able to go back on air this fast. It's for them, it's a message of defiance, trying to assure Iraqis, as well as most of the Arab street who watch Iraqi television through its satellite channel, that the Iraqis are still resisting and they intend to continue doing so. Carol?
I was just going to ask you about the sophistication of this TV station, because frankly we were surprised that it's up and running again.
Many people have been surprised, although the Iraqis have been experienced in wars. They have been hit before by wars so many times, whether with the U.S. or with Iran, and probably they have been preparing themselves for such a strike. At the same time, it's very important for them to make sure that their message is still there to all Iraqi people, because they know there's a counter message coming from the United States trying to rally the Iraqi people for this war, in favor of this war, and the Iraqis are trying to counter it by saying that this attack by the United States, this invasion, is not targeting Saddam Hussein only, but targeting Iraqis and Iraq as a nation. And they're trying to appeal to every sector of the society, the tribes, the soldiers, the families. That's why when Saddam Hussein is on the air, he always refers to the tribe name of the Iraqis. He sometimes mentions even names of fighters who have been able to arrest U.S. soldiers or have downed U.S. planes in order to motivate people to rally around him. Carol?
And I know that perhaps the messages coming from Iraqi television have rallied some within Iraq, but how about the rest of the Arab world?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Carol, because the Arab world on the first night, when they saw the explosions taking place in Baghdad, their most concern was for the Iraqi civilians that this attack is actually destroying Baghdad, which is a very old Arab capital. In the minds of a lot of Arab people, it's a place that symbolizes the civilization of the Arab nation. And so many were concerned, many were sad. Afterwards, when the Iraqi